The story of the Red Army's T-34 tank is central to understanding the pivotal struggles of the Eastern Front during World War II. This exceptional fighting vehicle arrived on the battlefield as a powerful surprise, ultimately helping to shatter the designs Adolf Hitler held for conquering the Soviet Union. Its impact was immediate and profound, fundamentally changing the trajectory of the war against Nazi Germany. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, on June 22, 1941, the German forces, known as the Nazis, quickly discovered that the Red Army possessed armored vehicles far superior to what they had anticipated. The presence of the T-34 in 1941 was described as a rude shock for the Germans. This tank represented a critical shift in armored warfare, combining three essential elements: firepower, protection, and mobility into a superb and balanced package. The ability of the T-34 to take on and destroy the best of the German armored fighting vehicles, or Panzers, signaled the end of the swift, easy victories the Nazis had previously enjoyed. The lasting importance of the T-34 extends beyond its immediate battlefield performance. It symbolizes a momentous triumph achieved by the Soviets over fascism in the face of immense struggle. Professor John Erickson, an author specializing in the history of the war on the Eastern Front, stated that for the Russians, the T-34 was unquestionably a war-winning weapon. The massive scale of its deployment, manufactured in thousands upon thousands, stands as a tribute to the diligence, devotion, patriotism, and self-sacrifice displayed not only by the soldiers using the tank, but by the entire population enduring extraordinary adversity. The T-34, therefore, is not merely a piece of military hardware. It is an enduring representation of Soviet resolve and industrial strength during the greatest tank conflict in history. The immediate shock of the T-34's introduction led to deep concern within the Nazi high command. By 1942, the careworn Nazi Führer, Adolf Hitler, openly lamented his decision to invade the vast Soviet Union. At his Wolf's Lair headquarters near Rastenburg in East Prussia, Hitler confided in his military inner circle, saying that if he had known just how many of these tanks existed, he would have had second thoughts about invading. This lament underscores the critical role the T-34 played in halting the Panzers right at the gates of Moscow. The realization that the Soviets possessed such a powerful and numerous weapon fundamentally upset Hitler's initial plans for conquest on the Eastern Front. Thus, the story of the T-34 is a narrative of industrial capacity meeting design innovation under existential pressure. It is the history of a machine that remained effective through numerous modifications from its surprise debut in 1941 until the final collapse of the Third Reich in the ruins of Berlin in 1945.
The foundations of armored superiority. The creation of the T-34 was not accidental. It emerged from a crucial period of Soviet military evaluation and design during the late 1930s. Initially, the Soviet Union had lagged behind both the Western powers and Germany in the development of sophisticated armored fighting vehicles. However, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin and the Red Army High Command, later known as Stavka, carefully assessed the lessons learned from recent conflicts. Specifically, the experiences gained during the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939 and the costly Russo-Finnish War of 1939 to 1940 provided invaluable insights. By 1941, this intense period of evaluation and redesign culminated in the T-34, which had not only caught up but surpassed the designs fielded by both the Germans and the future Western allies. The design process for this groundbreaking tank began during 1939 and 1940, precisely as the German Panzers were rapidly overwhelming the nations of Poland and northwestern Europe. The underlying concept for the tank, designated the A-20 prototype, was presented to the Defense Council of the Soviet of People's Commissars in Moscow in May 1938. The design bureau head responsible for the T-34 was Mikhail Koshkin. Supporting him were several key engineers: Alexander Morozov, who was tasked with building the powertrain, Nikolai Kucherenko and P. Vashchevsky, who led the suspension team, and M. Tarshinov, who managed the vital armor layout of the new vehicle. The A-20 initial design eventually led to the A-32, which was a version featuring increased armor. This in turn developed directly into the final design recognized as the T-34. The overall engineering achievement was remarkable, centered on achieving a perfect balance between the three necessary factors of tank design: firepower, protection, and mobility. Typically, tank designers have to sacrifice one or more of these attributes in favor of the others, but the Soviet engineers managed to avoid such compromises with the T-34.
One of the defining features of the initial T-34 was its formidable armament, a 76.2mm gun. For the time period, this weapon possessed real hitting power. The tank's ability to combine this punch with high mobility in a single superb package stunned the Germans when they first encountered it in July 1941. They discovered to their horror that the T-34's gun could effectively knock out their own armored fighting vehicles at ranges longer than their own guns could successfully reply. Beyond the main weapon, the tank's protection was radically enhanced by its sloping armor. This innovative design provided unusual protection, making shells more likely to deflect rather than penetrate. The T-34 also boasted a superior diesel engine and the reliable Christie suspension system, which together provided superb cross-country performance. The adoption of a diesel engine also offered a significant operational advantage, reducing the risk of fire compared to gasoline engines commonly used by other nations. The physical specifications of the initial T-34 model were robust. Its overall length, excluding the gun barrel, was 5,920 millimeters. It had a width of 2,950 millimeters and a height of 2,600 millimeters. The weight of this medium tank was 26,500 kilograms. The armor protection ranged from 65 to 100 millimeters thick. Propelling this formidable machine was a V234 V12-cylinder liquid-cooled diesel engine situated at the rear of the vehicle. This engine had a substantial capacity of 38,880 cubic centimeters. It could deliver a maximum output of 500 horsepower at 1,800 revolutions per minute. The tank featured a dry multi-plate clutch and a 5 forward 1 reverse gearbox, utilizing a front sprocket drive and clutch and brake steering. It employed mechanical brakes and ran on tracks that were 500 millimeters wide. The tank's electric system operated on 12 or 24 volts and had a fuel capacity of 450 liters, which was later increased to 650 liters. The T-34's road speed was impressive, reaching 34 miles per hour. Its cross-country speed, depending on the ground grade and roughness, typically ranged between 10 and 15.62 miles per hour. Crucially, the tank's broad tracks and low ground bearing pressure meant that it could continue moving effectively on soft terrain where German tanks frequently became immobilized, a critical advantage for warfare on the Eastern Front, where roads were often poor or non-existent. Its operational range was listed as 290 miles. Inside, the crew compartment was relatively spacious because the transmission was located in the rear of the vehicle, meaning the drivetrain did not have to pass through the crew area. The initial T-34 housed a crew of 4. Its secondary armament consisted of a 7.62mm coaxial Degtyaryov DT machine gun mounted in the hull, fired by a dedicated gunner seated next to the driver. Ammunition for the main 76.2mm gun was strategically stored along the walls of the tank, in bins submerged into the hull flooring, and in racks on the sides of the turret. Drums for the secondary 7.62mm machine gun were kept in the rear of the turret. Later in the war, the basic chassis proved so effective and durable that it could support significant upgrades. Following the crucial Battle of Kursk, which the Red Army won in 1943, the tank was upgraded. From late 1943 onward, the T-34 received a heavier 85mm gun in the main turret, resulting in the formidable T-34-85. This continuous modification capability, built upon the same fundamental chassis, was a remarkable engineering feat. The T-34-85 is considered by many experts, including Drs. Matthew Hughes and Chris Mann, to hold the strongest claim for the title of the best all-around tank of any stage of World War II. The design's durability extended well beyond the conflict. It remained the main battle tank for the Soviet Union until the middle of the 1950s. Furthermore, its longevity is unprecedented for a major modern weapon. The Bosnian Serbs were still utilizing the T-34-85s during the fighting in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The triumph of production and logistics.
A vital, if often overlooked, element of the T-34's success was the overwhelming scale of its production. When the Germans invaded, the Soviets had approximately 1,200 T-34s ready for use. The subsequent mobilization of Soviet industry, even under duress, led to staggering manufacturing numbers. The ability of the Soviet Union to outproduce Germany in armored vehicles was a devastating blow to Hitler's military ambitions. Throughout the entire period from 1939 to 1945, the Third Reich managed to produce 19,938 tanks. Despite the streamlining efforts implemented by the Nazi Minister of Armaments and War Production Albert Speer, the Soviets vastly outnumbered them. The Soviet factories delivered 53,552 T-34 tanks alone to the battlefields of Eastern Europe. This statistical disparity fundamentally shifted the balance of power.
The logistical advantage held by the Soviets stemmed directly from their production philosophy. While the Germans harbored an obsession with creating more and more unique models of tanks, the Soviets focused predominantly on the T-34. This standardization provided a clear practical advantage over their more mechanized German foes. If a mobile German unit broke down, finding spare parts for their specific unique model could be difficult. In stark contrast, the tank crews of the Red Army could literally scavenge any battlefield and reliably find the necessary components to repair their damaged T-34s. Many of these resilient fighting vehicles were driven directly from the factory and into combat, reflecting the urgency and speed of Soviet wartime production. The majority of the early T-34s were manufactured at a vast industrial center popularly known as Tankograd, located in Chelyabinsk, east of the Ural Mountains in Soviet Asia. This industrial complex was formed when two major factories, evacuated from Leningrad and Kharkov, were successfully relocated to begin work anew away from the immediate threat of the German advance. The relatively simple construction process of the T-34 was instrumental in achieving these high output figures. Its proven effectiveness as a combination of numerous effective design features ensured that production continued even after World War II concluded. The basic T-34 design also served as the foundation for powerful variants, including the Su-85 and Su-100 assault guns. The movement of these vast numbers of T-34s, along with their crews, relied heavily on the extensive Soviet network of railroad lines. This strategic railway network proved essential to the defense and eventual victory of Mother Russia. It allowed the Red Army to rapidly concentrate enormous numbers of tanks at critical junctures, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, enabling them to decisively turn the tide of the war. However, the nature of this Soviet production emphasis has been subject to discussion. While production record of the T-34, totaling around 55,000, compared to the German total tank production, approximately 20,000, seems to demonstrate superior Soviet manufacturing power, some historical analyses suggest these statistics might be misleading. For instance, one perspective holds that while Russia excelled at producing high quantities of tanks, artillery, and small tactical combat aircraft, it produced very little of other essential logistical support items. A significant portion of the Red Army's logistical foundation relied on foreign aid. 3/4 of the 600,000 trucks used by Russia for logistical support, for example, were manufactured in America. Furthermore, the sustenance of the Russian army was heavily dependent on American spam, or resources plundered from the land, and most military radio equipment also originated from America. This contrasts sharply with the challenges faced by German industry. Germany's industry output had competing interests, requiring the diversion of resources to the Atlantic War, necessitating the construction of 1,000 U-boats. Additionally, Germany expended substantial resources, approximately 1/3 of its artillery shells and barrels, and 1.5 million personnel on anti-aircraft defense against the relentless bombing campaigns of the Anglo-American forces. Unlike Russia, Germany had to dedicate capacity to feeding its large army and constructing its own complex electronics, such as radios. Had Russia been forced to produce all its necessary materials internally, and had Germany been able to focus solely on the demands of the Eastern Front, the production figures and overall industrial balance might have been significantly different.
Regardless of external support, the sheer volume of T-34s produced was achieved through incredible national sacrifice and focus. The vast numbers that reached the front line provided an armored spearhead. While in combat, T-34s often served a dual purpose. Because the Red Army did not possess dedicated armored personnel carriers on the front lines, the tanks routinely functioned as infantry armored personnel carriers, transporting soldiers alongside the armor. The tanks typically left the factory floor with a basic dark green painted finish. They were later adapted with camouflage, sometimes featuring white paint applied haphazardly for winter operations. Political officers from the Communist Party, known as commissars, encouraged the crews to paint powerful patriotic slogans on the sides of the T-34s, bolstering morale and ideological commitment. Hitler's technical obsession and the German response. The unexpected dominance of the T-34 forced a drastic and perhaps overly complicated reaction from the German leadership. Colonel General Alfred Jodl, who served as Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel's deputy in the German Armed Forces High Command structure, noted that Hitler quickly grasped the severe challenge the T-34 posed to the Reich's outdated Panzer arm. Hitler responded by restructuring the entire armaments sector. He created the Ministry for Weapons and Munitions, initially under Fritz Todt and later managed by Albert Speer. Hitler retained personal control over virtually all aspects of production, leaving only the construction of airplanes and ships to the Air Force and the Navy. From that point forward, Hitler personally dictated the monthly quota, the scope, and the direction of all armaments production, right down to the last specific detail. Hitler's personal involvement was driven partly by an astonishing, if often self-aggrandizing, technical and tactical vision. Jodl credited Hitler personally with becoming the creator of modern weaponry for the army. It was due to Hitler's insistence that the shorter guns mounted on the German tanks were replaced with longer 75mm and 88mm guns. Furthermore, he personally mandated that the 37mm and 50mm anti-tank guns be replaced with the more effective 75mm anti-tank gun. Hitler took particular pride in his foresight regarding gun design, especially after the T-34 appeared with its long-barreled gun. According to Albert Speer's 1970 memoirs, Inside the Third Reich, Hitler loved to casually present technical knowledge, often implying the information was his own. When the T-34 became famous for its long gun, Hitler was triumphant. He claimed that he had earlier demanded that exact kind of long-barreled gun. Speer recalled hearing Hitler loudly criticizing the obstinacy of the Army Ordnance Office. He had previously proposed increasing the velocity of the tank missile by lengthening the barrel, but the Ordnance Office had turned down the idea. The Ordnance Office had argued at the time that such a major change would throw the entire design out of balance, as the long barrel would overload the front of the Panzer IV, which was not originally built to accommodate such a heavy gun. Hitler constantly resurrected this incident whenever his ideas faced opposition, stating, "I was right at the time, and no one wanted to believe me. Now I'm right again."
When the German army recognized the desperate need for a tank that could outmaneuver the relatively fast T-34 with superior speed, Hitler intervened again. He insisted that greater gains would be achieved by prioritizing increased armor weight and greater gun range, rather than high mobility. In this technical sphere, Hitler had even memorized the necessary performance figures by heart. This personal initiative by Hitler resulted in the rapid development of sophisticated new tanks specifically intended to challenge and defeat the T-34. The resulting modern tanks, the Panther, the Tiger, and the massive King Tiger, or Tiger II, were developed directly at Hitler's insistence. The emergence of these formidable new German Panzers was a direct consequence of the Red Army's stunning success with the T-34. This technological arms race was dramatically highlighted just before the Battle of Kursk in 1943. The Nazis were determined to achieve a massive victory at Kursk, particularly following their catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad earlier that same year. Former Soviet Premier Nikita S. Khrushchev wrote in his 1970 memoir Khrushchev Remembers about the atmosphere leading up to Kursk. He noted that the enemy was highly confident of victory. Khrushchev recalled a captured order from a destroyed German armored unit, which contained a message intended for the German troops. This message effectively stated that the soldiers were now engaging in an offensive with tanks that were far superior to the Russian T-34s. The order acknowledged that the T-34 had, until that point, been considered the best tank in the world, even better than Germany's own earlier models, but it asserted that the new Tiger tanks were unequaled. The order concluded that with such a potent weapon, the warriors of the German army could not fail to crush their enemy. Indeed, these new German tanks were menacing. However, the Soviet troops learned swiftly how to effectively counter them. The Red Army's victory at Kursk was decisive, tipping the balance of the war permanently in the Soviet favor and determining the ultimate defeat of Hitlerite Germany. Once again, the T-34 had played a major decisive role in securing this victory. Operational impact and battlefield cases. The history of the T-34 is defined by its operational effectiveness across the brutal entirety of the Eastern Front. When it first appeared in July 1941, it immediately disrupted the established superiority of the German Panzers. The T-34 brought a new standard to armored warfare, one that necessitated a complete overhaul of German tank design and tactics. The superb combination of firepower, armor protection, and mobility allowed the T-34 to excel in the unique environment of Eastern European warfare. The tank's broad tracks and low ground-bearing pressure were crucial, enabling it to maintain progress on soft ground that often bogged down lighter or less strategically designed German armor. This ability to operate effectively off-road provided the Red Army with a tactical flexibility that the invading Nazis struggled to match. The initial shock to the German forces was significant. Doctors Matthew Hughes and Chris Mann highlighted that the T-34-76 model of 1941 possessed the capacity to engage and destroy the best tanks the Germans had available. The fact that the T-34 continued, despite facing setbacks and continuous innovation from the Germans, to hold its own until the very last days of the war in Berlin speaks volumes about its fundamental design quality. The decisive role of the tank in major strategic operations cannot be overstated. The T-34 contributed significantly to the halting of the German advance on Moscow, preserving the Soviet capital and preventing an early catastrophic defeat. Later, the concentration of T-34s, made possible by the efficiency of the railroad network, proved instrumental at the Battle of Stalingrad. This ability to mass forces allowed the Red Army to execute the operations necessary to turn the tide of the conflict. Perhaps the greatest testament to the T-34's effectiveness was its dominance in the Battle of Kursk in 1943. This conflict, recognized as the greatest tank encounter up to that time, resulted in a decisive victory for the Red Army. The performance of the T-34 was central to this outcome, paving the way for the introduction of the even more powerful T-34-85 model later that year. In 1944, the Soviet armed forces mounted a devastating offensive that utilized their armored superiority. Advancing T-34s, sometimes stirring up clouds of summertime dust, led the way as Red Army soldiers crouched behind them. This enraging offensive carried the Red Army directly to the gates of Berlin.
The T-34-85 variant, introduced with the 85mm gun, refined the T-34's already impressive specifications. This iteration solidified the tank's claim as arguably the best all-around tank of the war. Its ability to maintain high performance while incorporating a heavier gun and even more substantial armor onto the original basic chassis was a testament to the initial design's genius. Beyond its primary role against Nazi armor, the T-34 was frequently adapted for other combat roles. Due to the lack of dedicated armored personnel carriers on the front lines of the Red Army, the T-34s served double duty, transporting infantry and providing armored support simultaneously. The strategic use of the T-34 was not confined solely to the fight against Germany. The immense fleet of T-34s was also shipped by rail across the Soviet Union, utilizing the vast Trans-Siberian Railway. This deployment was crucial for the late summer 1945 operation to smash the Japanese Kwantung Army in Mongolia. The widespread and robust nature of the tank's design ensured its continued use in various conflicts long after World War II concluded. T-34s were deployed against the Americans during the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. They were also utilized by Arab nations fighting against the Israeli Defense Forces during the Six-Day War in June 1967, and again during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. As previously noted, the T-34-85 models were still in active service with the Bosnian Serbs during the fighting in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, demonstrating unparalleled longevity for a major modern weapons system. Insights, findings, and implications. The success of the T-34 offers deep insights into the nature of modern warfare, industrial mobilization, and strategic priorities. The primary finding is that strategic simplicity and mass production, when coupled with superior initial design, can overcome tactical complexity and technological perfectionism. The genius of the T-34 lay in its initial design concept, a tank that made no compromises in the balance of firepower, protection, and mobility.
This was achieved by engineers like Mikhail Koshkin and Alexander Marzov, who created a vehicle that was fundamentally special. Its innovative features, such as the sloped armor and the use of the V234 diesel engine, immediately rendered opposing German armor designs obsolete upon their first encounter.
The production figures highlight a core strategic difference between the two adversaries. The sheer volume of 53,552 T-34s produced by the Soviets compared to the 19,938 tanks of all types produced by the Third Reich created an insurmountable quantitative advantage. This difference was amplified by the Soviet policy of standardization. By relying mainly on the T-34, the Soviets ensured that spare parts were readily available, allowing damaged vehicles to be rapidly returned to service. In contrast, the German obsession with diverse and unique tank models led to logistical headaches and delays in repairs. However, the discussion of superior Soviet production must also acknowledge the critical role of external aid. As noted by commentators, the apparent manufacturing muscle of the Soviet Union was specialized. While they produced tanks in massive numbers, they relied heavily on American support for essential logistical elements, including 3/4 of their transport trucks, many military radios, and food supplies. This finding suggests that the triumph of the T-34 was not solely an internal Soviet industrial victory, but rather a successful coordination of concentrated armored production with crucial, sustained logistical inputs from their allies. Had Russia been required to produce all its own support systems, while simultaneously facing the extensive diversion of resources Germany dedicated to anti-aircraft defense and U-boat construction, the figures might have changed. The profound meaning of the T-34 extends beyond military analysis, reaching into the realm of human history and societal experience. Professor John Erickson observed that the tank represents a far greater achievement than simply a battlefield weapon. It is a symbol of the stupendous victory won over fascism. The ability to produce so many thousands of these tanks during a period of such enormous adversity is a profound testament to the devotion, patriotism, and self-sacrifice of the entire Soviet population. Yet, the victory was achieved at an extraordinary human cost. The most expended and most numerous weapon in the conflict was arguably the Russian soldier. The nature of service in the Red Army during World War II was exceptionally severe, involving a rate of casualties that would be viewed as unacceptable in a modern civilized society. Thus, the success of the T-34 is intrinsically linked to the immense severity and sacrifice required of the soldiers who manned them and the populace who built them. The durability of the T-34 design remains an outstanding feature. Its longevity, remaining the Soviet main battle tank until the mid-1950s and seeing service in conflicts decades later, including the former Yugoslavia, demonstrates that the original design parameters were exceptionally robust and forward-thinking. Final reflections and key takeaways. The T-34 tank stands as the main weapon of war that successfully blunted the initially invincible strategy of the Nazi invasion. Its story is a powerful illustration of how technological innovation, when matched with centralized industrial focus and sheer volume of output, can fundamentally alter the course of global conflict. The key takeaway is the profound realization, bitterly expressed by Adolf Hitler himself, that overwhelming quantity coupled with quality can overcome initial tactical momentum. The realization that the T-34 was there in so many thousands and thousands proved to be a decisive factor in the defense of the Soviet Union. The tank was designed and prototyped under wartime pressure, with the first models ready just as Operation Barbarossa commenced. The core design elements, the initial 76.2mm gun, the revolutionary sloped armor, and the robust Christie suspension system gave the T-34 an edge in firepower, protection, and crucial cross-country mobility, particularly when traversing the difficult terrain of the Eastern Front. The subsequent upgrade to the T-34-85 with the heavier 85mm gun ensured its continued relevance and dominance against the later generations of German heavy armor.
Ultimately, the T-34's legacy is twofold. On a technical level, it is widely regarded as the most influential tank design of World War II, achieving a near-perfect balance of essential combat requirements. On a historical and cultural level, it represents the collective, diligent, and patriotic effort of the Soviet people. The T-34 was integral to the victory at key battles like Stalingrad and Kursk.
paving the way for the devastating 1944 offensive that concluded in Berlin in 1945. The lasting impact of this formidable vehicle is reflected not only in the strategic defeat of the Third Reich, but also in its continued presence on the battlefields of the post-war world, from Korea to the Middle East, testifying to a design that was both simple enough for mass production and sophisticated enough for long-term combat effectiveness. The T-34 was, in the words of military historians, something truly special.